It is Thursday, August 14th. This is the Christian Commute. I am your host, Seth Dunn, and you're riding home with me, but I'm going to stop at Wendy's first. The Wendy's off my exit. My in-laws are in to visit. My wife has not started making food yet. If I know that side of my family, there's going to be indecision and lateness of food. Now, I called before I left the house to arrange something to be made. But with that many people, I don't know if there's going to be any food left for me. So I'm going to drive through Wendy's and get me a biggie meal as a little $5 insurance plan. And I am very hungry because I ate a sensible small portion of lunch today, and I've been starving. So I'm going to get that. And then I'm going to watch Cartersville High School football on TV. I could go to the game, but it's still hot. And when tickets are $10 a piece, and I got 6 kids. You do that math. That ain't happening. Anyway, I'm going to watch it on TV. I got my TV subscription. That's what's going on. And I got a full show for you today. I brought all that up to say I got to stop at Wendy's. So there'll be a slight interruption for me to get my food. Today's show title is The Evolution of the TV Preacher. The Evolution of the TV Preacher. Talked a little bit about Roswell. I talked a lot about Roswell Street Baptist Church yesterday and how Nelson Price was a TV preacher who grew the church and had a TV ministry. I want to talk about how things were then with your Charles Stanleys and your Nelson Prices of the world, people selling you cassette tapes, to where we're at now with podcast and multi-campus, and how we got here. As always, we have the Bible chapter review, and we would get to it, but somebody came through with a question. Jeff from Slow Drive in Florida. Yawn, sorry. Jeff has a question about the apostles. But let's start with the Bible chapter review. Luke chapter 9, verses 7 through 9. In chapters 1 through 6, we gave the story of Jesus sending out the 12, going town to town, not packing supplies with them, to preach the Gospels, heal people, do miracles. So starting in verse 7, now Herod the Tetrarch heard of all that was happening, and he was greatly perplexed, because it was said by some that John had risen from the dead, and by some that Elijah had appeared, and by others that one of the prophets of old had risen again. Herod said, I myself had John beheaded, but who is this man about whom I hear such things? And he kept trying to see him. Now people are excited, and people are following Jesus around because he's healing people and doing miracles, preaching the kingdom. Herod doesn't share the same excitement. Herod's perplexed. He's a little worried, I think, that what he did to John might come back on him. He had John beheaded because John was preaching against Herod's adultery, and Herod's adulterous wife sort of manipulated Herod into sorry, the Wendy's line is longer than I thought it would be. Into beheading John. And now people are talking about who Jesus is. Is he John the Baptist risen from the dead? Is he Elijah returned? Is he another one of the prophets? Because it's only a prophet in their mind who can do these great works. And remember, Israel hasn't seen a prophet like that. Before John the Baptist, Israel hadn't seen a prophet for hundreds of years. And then John the Baptist, we sometimes call him the last of the Old Testament prophets, even though he's not in the Old Testament. John the Baptist has been beheaded. And now you have Jesus. And Herod wants to see just wants to see him. He doesn't long for the preaching of Jesus. That's not what we hear here in the text, that he wants to hear the preaching of the kingdom. No, and remember when Jesus was born, what did the king do then? I think it was a different Herod by now. I think it was this Herod's predecessor, his father. What did the king do then? Well, he wanted to put Jesus to death when the wise men came and said, "Where's one who's born the king of the Jews?" He wanted to consolidate his power. He consulted the people about the prophecies, and then instead of rejoicing in the fulfilled prophecy, he slaughtered all the children he thought were old enough to be Jesus, but Jesus escaped to Egypt. So now we have King Herod, and I guess I should have Googled this before I did a podcast on it, but I'm pretty sure this is a different Herod than that one. Not Herod the Great, the builder. Now it says Herod the Tetrarch, but that just means somebody who's not a total monarch, somebody who's an underling of another ruler. He's an underling of Caesar. One would imagine he also would be subordinate to Pilate. If they came to a huge disagreement on something, I would think Pilate's will would trump this guy's will, because Pilate's the Roman governor. But nevertheless, Herod's there as the king of the Jews, in scare quotes, ruling a part of the area ethnically. It helps people to have a king who's the same ethnicity as them, like how the Japanese had a Chinese emperor during World War II. If you guys didn't know that, they did. But he was a puppet emperor. And now people are talking, they're wrong about who Jesus is. And now the people who are under Herod's rule are looking towards someone, talking about someone, looking up to someone. And Herod himself wants to investigate. And with that, I'll end the Bible chapter review. Let me tell you this. There's no accounting for people who won't move with the times. This is just a commentary on life. This is not a Bible thing. Do you remember when debit cards first came out? Not only that, but when they went from doing the old swiper thing, I don't even know what you call it. Sometimes, every once in a while, you can still pay with a credit card this way if somebody's computer is down. But when I was a kid and somebody paid with a credit card, they had this machine. It was a mechanical machine. It wasn't a computer. And they laid the receipt down, and they laid your credit card on it, and it had the carbon paper, and they swiped this big black thing over the credit card and the paper, and it would put an imprint of your credit card on the paper. Hold on, they're going to ask me what I want. I'm going to tell them I already ordered.
Welcome to Wendy's. Order when you're ready.
I have a mobile order for Seth.
You said mobile order for Seth?
Yes.
All right. Pull up to the second window whenever the line gets down, all right?
Thanks. Painless. You see how painless that was? But that's how you paid with a credit card, and that took time. Arguably more time than it took to pay with cash, because if somebody paid cash, the cashier took the cash, they counted a little change, and you were done. But they'd have to get out the credit card thing, and they did that, and then they would send those receipts to the credit card company, and then the credit card company would send you a paper bill. When I was a kid, most of the people wrote checks at the grocery store. That's what my parents did. People would go write a check at the grocery store. They'd use the grocery store a little bit like the ATM on a Friday sometimes. Maybe they'd write a check for $20 more than their bill was, and they'd get a little cash out for the weekend. And some people, and most of them are now dead, still are writing checks at the grocery store, but you don't see it a lot now. But I remember when I was in college, and I would go to the grocery store, and I'm 20 years old, and I got a debit card, and I'm waiting in line, and somebody in front of me, and instead of being convenient, whips out the checkbook. Let me show the cashier your driver's license. Let me write down in my little check register what I spent, because I'm going to go home and balance my checkbook lately. I'm going to balance my checkbook. No, I want to use my debit card and the computer is going to tell me I had $100 and now I have $50. There's no balancing. I don't have checks out there. The equivalent of those people now who gum up the grocery store line are people who don't order on the app. I ordered my food in the parking lot before I left. I should have just been able to pull up and get my food. But instead, in front of me, there's 3 or 4 Luddite jabronis who are going to sit here and talk into the box. I know they have cell phones because everybody has one. But still, they're going to take forever. Now this guy's going to hand his card to the cashier after he talked in the box. And even though I ordered in a super convenient and expedient way, I have to wait for these people. And I'm hangry. If I was the Incredible Hulk, I would turn green. Well, I guess if I was Bruce Banner, I would turn green like the Hulk, get out of my car, throw their cars out of the way, rip the bricks off the side of the building, and go eat my burger. Hulk mad. Nobody had to do anything for my order. I rolled up, and as soon as I told them I was here, they had it on a screen. Boom, they hit the button, it's already done. You know, when I told you about my orange chicken on Sunday. We ordered that orange chicken in the car. Showed up to Panda Express. It was already ready. It was just ready. Panda Express gets crowded like a Subway. You get in that line, and you get people, well, I don't know what I want. Let me sample this. And we were on a time schedule. We're trying to make the game. Walked in and ate. You know, everybody would be walking in and eating with no wait if everybody would just use the app. Now, finally, the trucker, I'm second in line now from the end. The people who order out loud at Wendy's, and where Arby's, Chick-fil-A, you name it, they're the people who were using checks at the grocery store 20 years ago, and they're the people who give to the cooperative program. All right, let's go to the question in the inbox. This comes from Jeff from Slow Driving, Florida. Is it true that Jesus had only 5 out of his 12 disciples, or 12 apostles, the disciples who would become the apostles? Is it true that Jesus only had 5 out of 12 disciples for the first year and a half of his 3-year ministry? Or, any basis to this claim? And the thing is, Jeff went to hear a preacher, I think he said yesterday. Is today Thursday? He went to Wednesday night church, and it must have not been his. So yesterday, was there preaching on Wednesday night? Usually Wednesday night's a meal and a Bible study, but whatever. Whoever the talker was, wherever Jeff was, whatever day he was there, the guy made this point. And Jeff was questioning it because he wasn't sure about it. And he's writing me and he says, is there any basis for this? So before I answer with, and I'm really not sure, I don't know, I'm going to give a Borg answer, irrelevant. Is this relevant to any kind of preaching we do from the Bible? I mean, it might be something that somebody said if they're teaching about the life of Jesus through Wednesday night. Like, oh, well, he called the disciples. Now you're going to listen to me eat fries. He called the disciples, but didn't have all 12 of them at once. I do know this, and even common sense kind of tells us this. If you weren't really super familiar with the Bible, they didn't have all 12 at once if he didn't call them all together. And we know he didn't call them all together. Some of them he called one at a time, some of them he called a couple at a time. And we see this in Scripture. And if somebody cared enough, like I guess this preacher Jeff was listening to, if somebody cared enough to go through all 4 Gospels, especially the Synoptics, and try to create a timeline of Jesus calling them, they could conclude something like Jeff mentioned. Like, oh, well, he didn't have them all for 18 months. But I would caution against doing that. One, because I don't know that the writers of the Gospels were as concerned with as concerned with tight timelines as modern writers are, as we are now. Hey, freak, where's my hamburger? There it is. So that's something you have to figure out from, like I said, looking through and trying to construct a timeline. Second of all, I don't know how it's theologically relevant. Now, I'm going to say, this is weird, I'm trying to eat, and usually I've got the headset that has the thing in front of my mouth. I don't have that today, and I keep thinking it's there. I'm going to just imagine somebody preaching through the Gospels and Acts, making some questionable applications, and this happens all the time. I'm going to sip and wait till I get done chewing because I'm starving. They've put enough ketchup on this. You know, these fast food hamburgers, they ain't great when you're really hungry. It tastes so good. Let's say some preacher was talking about building a church or building a ministry, and he was like, listen, you're not going to start out with everybody you're ever going to have. You know, eventually we're going to get an executive pastor, and we're going to get a board of elders, and we're going to get a youth pastor and associate pastor. But that doesn't all just come at once. You got to wait. You got to disciple people. You got to get the word out. You got to grow. If Jesus himself didn't start with 12, why should you expect to start with 12? No, you start small, just like Jesus did, and we can use the ministry of Jesus as an example of how to build our own ministry. Sorry, champ, no. No. When I was at the Demonic Church of Rolling Springs, the pastor was preaching through the Gospels. I don't remember if it was Luke or Acts. But he got Luke or Mark. And he got his story about the paralytic guy whose friends lowered him through the roof on his pallet so Jesus could heal him, so they couldn't get through the door. And the pastor made an application over your closest friends should be Christians. Look at that guy's friends, what they did for him. And your closest friends should therefore be Christians. That's not a theological application of that text. Really good advice, but not a theological application of that text. So people do stuff like that all the time. So Jeff, I'm trying to imagine why a preacher would spend significant time talking about which apostles came first and how long it took to get 12. As if that has some kind of theological relevance other than it just being trivia. It's like, it's football season, right? Who'd you hire first? The defensive coordinator, the tight ends coach? But who cares? You're going to win or not? So, Jeff, I really don't have a good answer for that question because I think that would take a bit of research, really digging down into a chronology, and I don't care enough. I know you asked me, but I don't think we should care enough to even really find out about that timeline. It's like if somebody said, I think Dan Marino wore purple socks in the September game in 1984. Did the NFL play in September? I think they do. And I'm not going to go to the library and look at newspaper clippings to find out if it's true. What do I care? It doesn't have anything to do with anything. So that's my answer, Jeff. Is there a basis to that? Maybe there is. Maybe this guy did his homework and he he went through, and like I said, caveat, warning, they weren't as concerned with blow-by-blow timelines as we were. There's no quotes in ancient Greek, like, stuff like that, little specificities and specifics we don't have now. I don't know how fast it took Jesus to acquire all 12 of them. But we know he did. And we know, like we said in Luke yesterday, he sent them out to do preaching and healing. We know Judas is bad. We know Herod beheaded James. So, thanks for your question, Jeff. That's my answer. Now, I'm going to get to the evolution of the TV preacher. And we're going to get, isn't it great? We're going to get some more. When I was a kid, this is how it was. When I was a kid, there was TV preachers and you wrote checks at the grocery store. You didn't have Instacart and Kroger pickup. If you were rich, you might have had a housekeeper to go do your shopping. Let me find my barbecue sauce. This is always dangerous. Why did they give me 2 straws? These little $5 meal deals, they come with a really tiny drink, so you have to be judicious about your sips. You can't gulp. And usually they fill it with ice. But there's no ice in my cup. I don't know how they got it cold. But I actually benefited from that. It's not iced tea, it's cool tea. Here we go. I'm gonna eat my chicken nuggets. I want to say it was the 80s when televangelists got really popular. People who would get on TV and their ministry was a TV show and preaching to people on TV. Think of people like Jim Baker. And then think of a network like Trinity Broadcasting. And when I think of televangelists, and I think it's the same thing with most of you, most televangelists we imagine, not imagine that they're all too real. We think of like Robert Tilton and Jim Baker. They're almost always hucksters who want your money. A lot of them are prosperity pimps. So when I think of people growing up who had a big TV ministry, who weren't up there preaching like outright prosperity, they're few and far between. I mean, Charles Stanley comes to mind. There used to be some Presbyterian guy in Florida, I forget his name. But there's very few who are just like guys preaching in a church, and they nationally that I can remember who put it on TV. But aside from the televangelists, you started to see bigger churches getting TV cameras, filming their sermons, and they'd have a media ministry that involved cassette tapes of the sermons that you could write in and buy. Some of the guys would have a radio program. And a lot of people would have the TV locally or regionally. Like Adrian Rogers. If you're around the Memphis area, you would have grown up watching Love Worth Finding. It's Adrian Rogers. And I already mentioned Charles Stanley. And where I grew up, Woodland Park Baptist Church was a pretty big church. We had a couple of TV cameras in there. And we filmed the sermons. I don't know what they did with them. We didn't have cable. I didn't go home and watch them. I was already there. But you could get those videotapes, and you could get cassette tapes, And preachers of mid to large sized churches started having media ministries, TV and videotape. And the idea is that you could write in and get a cassette tape of that message, and you could give it to your friends to listen to evangelize them or disciple them further, or you could keep it for yourself. And what would happen with smaller preachers, preachers of smaller churches, they would get these tapes and maybe even the outlines of the big time preachers. James Merritt used to do this. Or I'm sorry, he didn't do it. He sold the stuff to people. People would get James Merritt's outlines, and then they'd start basing their sermons off James Merritt's outlines when they got his tape. And this is when you started to see the growth of the megachurch. Not multi-campus yet. That was Bill Hybels. That would come along later. But you'd have these megachurches grow. And a lot of times they grow around the regional TV preaching and cassette tapes of the pastor. And that would pull people into those churches regionally. But think about everybody around here watches the Atlanta Braves, right? We're Braves fans. Because why? Well, because that's the game we get. The Southeast is Braves country because a lot of times they were for a lot of years, they were the only team around. There were no Marlins in Florida, no Devil Rays in Florida. Closest teams were the Ohio teams. Cincinnati Reds, St. Louis Cardinals. So when the South got the Braves, that was the team for the entire South, and that's whose TV we get. And if you try to order the MLB extra innings package so you can watch all games, to this day they black out the games where you are to protect their local TV deals. So in the case of someone like Nelson Price, he would have TV around the Marietta, the Atlanta area, and he would grow that way, and he did. And that's one of the ways Roswell Street grew. That's one of the ways they filled those buildings. And it didn't matter how good of a preacher you were, you couldn't get your sermons out there unless you had a media team to do it for you, if you had the size and resources. So I want you to think of my little podunk church where I go to, of which I am a member, all right? We're off of Highway 61 in Cartersville. The name of our church is Redeeming Grace Baptist Church. I think officially it's just called Redeeming Grace Church. I always say Redeeming Grace Baptist Church. Because we ain't Presbyterian, we're Baptist. And our church is small. Our church building, our church is small, but our church building is small too. If 50 people were to come to our church on Sunday, it would probably fill it up. I don't think we've ever had 50 people. And we rent a little building, a little church building. It's got a sanctuary and a little fellowship hall where we have Sunday school. We rent the property for $200 a month. There are no volunteer people. Like a lot of these churches, a lot of these bigger churches around here, the people who don't even attend the church service, but the people who are just the volunteers who do things, like parking lot duty, audio visual, and coffee bar and Sunday school, it's like 10 times more than the people who even ever thought about coming to our church. But you know what? Anybody in the world can listen to the sermons we have on Sunday because we record them. Doesn't really take any manpower. We record the sermons, and then, I mean, I don't know if Brother David, the pastor, does it, or I don't know if Deacon, Ben does it. I don't do it. I don't know who puts our sermons online, but somebody does it. They're up there the next day. So now anybody in the world who wants to, they could listen to the sermons at our church, our little tiny church. So I want you to think about this. Back when your grandma was still alive and writing checks at the grocery store, if you wanted to hear what they said at the little church, you had to go. They didn't have a tape ministry. They didn't have an AV team. If they were lucky, they had some teenager in the back running the sound system and somebody playing the piano. But time marched on, and then they invented what? The iPod. So now, the iPod, and later the iPod Touch with a video screen, and finally the iPhone and Androids. When they invented the iPod, then people started having podcasts. So you got all these preachers with TV ministries, and they got radio ministries, and you have to pay for time for radio ministries. Radio time is expensive. So only the biggest, richest churches could get it. And it would eventually start to pay for itself or become profitable because they get on the radio and they'd say, support our ministry, donate or buy tapes, and people would. And then regionally people would come to those churches. Well, once the MP3 players were invented, you'd have a podcast. Now, anybody can have a podcast. Think about it. I got one. Think about how little effort I put into this podcast. But now we get to the point where the Redeeming Grace Baptist churches of the world can have their own podcast. And now we get to the point where the consumer says, why should I have to wait for a radio time slot or a Sunday sermon time slot when I can just listen to the sermon via the podcast whenever I want? I used to listen to preaching radio in the morning when I drove to work. I listened to 2 or 3 different shows. I listened to it on the way too, on the way home. Some radio preachers. When was the last time I did that? It's been years. You know when I stopped? When I got an MP3 player. That's it. Podcasts. And now it's not regional anymore, because now you can get the podcasts from anywhere. And now you can get a YouTube from anywhere. What do you think about this? If you wanted to watch a church service live, back when your grandma was alive writing checks, you had to watch it on TV. And usually the people who would do that were the people who were sick. Not even on vacation, because if you're on vacation, you're out of town, you don't get that channel. Now everybody's live. They're on YouTube, they're on Facebook, and it's cheap. You got $50 worth of equipment to do it. And then some nerdy guy up in the balcony. All it takes. So now it's live on YouTube, live on Facebook, and you can comment. Or you listen to the sermon podcast whenever you want. Now think on this. Think of this big mega church. Think of the Roswell Streets of the world. And they're drawing numbers and growing through their TV ministry. People are seeing it on TV locally and regionally, and they're coming and growing. People are paying money for a cassette tape. Did anybody pay money for a podcast? A sermon podcast? Now, if you put your podcast on iTunes, you can make it 99 cents. Anybody ever hear preachers? I mean, even Joel Osteen doesn't charge for his podcast, does he? You don't charge people money. It would be considered obscene to do that. Even Joel Osteen wouldn't do it. Now, if you're selling somebody a tape, well, hey, wait a minute. I got to pay the lady who makes the tapes. I got to pay the postage. I got to pay for the tape itself. I got to pay for an envelope. Yeah, you're going to have to send in some money for this tape. It's going to be marked up. Nobody's sending in money for a podcast. You get it for free. And then your church can have as many podcasts as it wants. How many churches have you noticed doing this? They have a sermon podcast, and they have a podcast later where the pastor talks about his sermon. So a couple of guys from the church have the sort of after party type podcast, post-game report, if you will. And they give other detail. And they can even say, hey, we got a Sunday school class. We'll podcast that. William Lane Craig out of Johnson Ferry Baptist Church. You can listen to his Sunday school class anytime you want, the Defenders class. You can watch it live on YouTube now, too. In fact, I think they've recorded every one there ever was. I mean, you can go back to listen to previous versions, because they cycle through every couple of years and have to start over. So what's happening to your mega church and your mega preacher who is drawing people with TV? That audience dries up. Radio dries up. So now you can't keep pulling people regionally to populate your mega church. What are you going to have to do to compensate? And, by the way, compete. Because used to be, Adrian Rogers was limited to Memphis. Right? Well, now all of a sudden, maybe the people of way over in Missouri have thought, well, wow, people can listen to Adrian Rogers instead of me. Why would they listen to me anymore? Because I don't care how many podcasts are out there. There's only so many hours in the day. So if you're one of these people who sends in money to the radio show or the TV because you think it's the right thing to do, you watch it. You know, that's why people send in money to PBS. Well, I watch it. I'm going to help. I'm going to pay for it. People on the telethon told me I should. Well, now all of a sudden the people in Florida are competing with the people in California. And all this that was supporting these mega churches drying up. What are they going to do? Well, one, they got to make it worth coming. Now they're going to put on a great show. It's not enough to do it with just preaching anymore. Not just the word. They got to have the light show, the praise band, the praise team, the LED screen. I mean, think of LED screens, guys. I see LED screens for sale on Facebook all the time. Why do you need these? To put the words of the song up? Do you really need a 30-foot LED screen to put the words of the song up? I mean, some churches do it with, they print programs and the music's in the program. We use hymn books where I am. A lot of churches are doing a projector. Regular people, I have a projector. Projectors used to be like $1,000. I mean, the bulbs in them were like $350. Now regular people have a projector. I've had a projector for 15 years. I don't use it anymore. I used to use it to watch football and play Nintendo Wii on. Now it's sitting in my foyer. But churches could have PowerPoint and a projector, but they don't use, was it ProPresenter? There's some kind of, ProPresenter I think is Macintosh brand PowerPoint, but there's some kind of specific church software I think they use for the slide. But what are these big churches doing with video screens? Oh, they're different colors. They're putting videos on them. They're using it to make a show. That's how they're answering. That's how they're getting people there and keeping people there, by putting on the huge show. That's why you didn't see that even in mega churches years ago when your grandma was alive writing checks at the grocery store. You didn't see that because it wasn't necessary. And now what are you seeing the churches do, these big ones? They're expanding their footprint. This is where multi-campus is coming from. You've got regional competition and national competition through media. All right, Roswell Street Baptist Church and Nelson Price's of the world and Charles Stanley's of the world. Used to be you had Charles Stanley on TV and Nelson Price on TV, and they had their tape ministry and their TV, and they were in a few miles from each other. Well, boom. Now they can get somebody from California. Now they can get somebody from Tennessee. It's coming from everywhere. Now you move the bricks and mortar. Now you move the bricks and mortar. It's sort of weird because with the rest of the economy, like Amazon, you see bookstores disappear. Like, why would anybody go to a bookstore? They'll just buy it from Amazon. It's there the next day. So brick and mortar stores are becoming rarer and rarer. Shopping malls are going by the wayside. And the stores that remain, grocery stores, because I want my groceries now. I don't want them to come from Amazon 2 days from now, and I want to pick out my own produce and steaks. Thank you very much. So it's sort of weird where you'd think there, in this, economically speaking, where you think there'd be less brick and mortar churches, they're actually becoming more brick and mortar churches because people know church is not online. Church is gathering with a group of people. Even the mega churches with the so-called I-campuses know that. So they want people to come and be engaged physically with others. Can't put on a children's program over Zoom, can you? All right, get all your 20 kids together. They're all going to sing Jesus Loves You. No, they got to be here to take them up in front of the church. Can't baptize somebody over YouTube. Okay? So you're seeing the multi-campus because you're seeing the people who have proven they can grow one big church, replicate it in a franchise way, and they're giving those people somewhere to go. The bigger the reach you have, the more you want to start expanding buildings to make it easier for those people not to drive so far. And then, so I'll give you an example. Cross Point just opened a campus in Ackworth. Because people from Ackworth were driving to Cartersville because they thought Cross Point was so great. But you know what that Cross Point campus is going to pick up? Now, in Ackworth, now it's going to pick up people from Kennesaw. Now maybe some people from Marietta. And maybe their next move is Kennesaw campus. But those people are going to get started how? On the media. And we see how a shift from tapes and video cameras to podcasts and YouTubes has necessitated the megachurches expanding their footprint to have more in-person people. Because you can't rely on those forms of media to fill you up and fill the money stream. competition's too much. You have to offer the physical space with the LED wall. And why don't you see little churches doing this? Why don't you see churches of 100 making another church of 100 and another church of 100 and having a multi-campus of a small to mid-sized church? Why don't you see this? Well, I'd like to think that those people know that it's bad ecclesiology. But it also has to do with social proof. Why should I listen to you, internet preacher? Well, I have 5,000 church members. I've impressed this many people. So if I've impressed 5,000 people, I can put out a new campus and maybe 1,000 more people will be impressed with me. So the biggest podcasts are still the big churches with that social proof. Also because those guys are more engaging speakers. They're two-story preachers, right? And I've talked about on the show before, one-story preachers and two-story preachers. If you go to a church that has seating in the balcony, they're going to hire a two-story preacher. Somebody who can preach where people want to come listen to him to fill that second story. Free market tends to work itself out even in church world. That's why you ended up, as I always pick on Brother Brad up there at Culver. That's why that little one-story small-town church has Brother Brad. And that's why Tabernacle that I'm driving through right by now, coming into town, that's why they have Patrick. Brother Patrick's a two-story preacher. So we will continue to see the death and decline of megachurches like Roswell Street, like First Baptist Jacksonville. But we will see the expansion, the unfortunate multi-campus expansion of churches like Woodstock, First Baptist Woodstock, and churches like J.D. Greer's church, like Summit, who have mastered the church takeover. They've mastered the podcast media. They've mastered their show, having their own band, and franchising that and offering that. So that's the evolution of the TV preacher. And it's sort of like natural selection. We know evolution is not true, and we don't want to get into social Darwinism either, because that's how you get Nazis. But you have that natural selection play out in the TV preacher. They're the TV preachers who die off and their church died off because they were TV preachers. And then they're the TV preachers who evolve into podcast preachers and YouTube preachers. And those are the guys who are expanding. Those are the guys who are coming to drink your milkshake. So now's my question to you. What sermons are you listening to through podcast or YouTube besides those of your local church? No, I'm not saying you shouldn't be listening to sermons beside those of your local church. To the contrary, as much time as you have, especially people like me driving in the car, now you can get any sermon from any church in the world now. I want you to think about that. You can get any sermon from any church in the world. There's churches you'll never hear of that have the sermons that you can listen to. All that's available to you. If you can find a good preacher, a faithful preacher, it's just going to edify you all the more. It will. And you can do stuff like this. You can say, well, you know what? I'm reading through Hebrews in my personal reading time right now, but in my church, we're preaching through Galatians. Let me just find that series on Hebrews from somebody in an expository series, and I'll listen to it. That's fantastic. That's great. But I just want to encourage you to remember, you're first and foremost a member of a local church. So your support needs to be there. Invariably, you will find preachers who are maybe a 10-story preacher and you go to a 1-story church. That's fine. Don't hold that against your pastor, Because remember, those guys preaching at you over YouTube will never pastor you. And I'll tell you this, even if they put a campus in your town and you go to it, they're still not pastoring you because they don't really pastor anybody. That's not their model. But I think we need to ask ourselves a question when it talks about a local church. If a local church is dependent for if its viability is dependent on its media ministry, there you see a church that's at risk of dying when media changes. There you see a church that's probably more of a media empire than it is a local body of believers. Hey, and the evolution of technology and new developments are just like anything. You can use a semi-automatic rifle to go hunting and feed your family, to fight off Nazis in WW2, or you can use it to shoot up a school like some madman or terrorist. It's in the way that you use it. That's where I wish I had a little button to press in a real radio station. It's in the way that you use it. I just hit that button. And then I'd make a point all the time. Are you using this right? It's in the way that you use it. I'd probably have to pay somebody a nickel for that every time I press the button. Use your technology, church people and individual Christians, for edification of others and spreading the gospel message. Please don't use it as just another way to build big buildings and pay salaries of 3-story preachers. Thanks for listening to the Christian Commute. Lord willing, I'll be back with you again Tuesday. I warned you guys about this. I said, my son's got a cross-country meet Friday. Yeah, I walked out and told my boss, I said, I'll see you Tuesday. Thanks for listening to the Christian Commute. Lord willing, I'll be back with you again Tuesday. As always, God bless. And as always, remember, Christianity is not about getting saved. It's about being saved. Oh, you know what? I was supposed to do a clean break of the show right there. But I remembered I didn't tell you to send your questions to sethdunn88@gmail.com or dial 470-315-0875. The Christian Commute, your roadside, theological roadside assistance. And I'm out of questions, so you guys got Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday to send me some new ones.